So thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Patricia Regier with Regier Educational Services, and I'm so excited to be talking today with Denis. I'm going to ask you to pronounce your last name, but I'm so pleased to be having a conversation with you today, talking about accessibility online and so much more. We're going to explore this topic. So can you tell us a little bit more about you, Denis, and pronouncing your name correctly? Because I just tried and didn't do a good job.
I sure can. So my name is Denis Boudreau. What do? I am a trainer, first and foremost. I'm an accessibility subject matter expert. So I work in the disability space. I work in the digital space, basically. I come from a background of development and design, building websites, that sort of stuff. And very early on discovered that the way that we were building websites excluded people with disabilities from the very get-go. And that rang something inside of me, that woke something inside of me. And I've been focusing on that particular piece of it ever since. It'll be like 21, 22 years sometime soon that I've dedicated my energy to making the digital space a more inclusive space for everyone, regardless of their ability to do whatever, or different demographics that are more easily excluded, like the elderly or non-native speakers or any other group that struggle with technology for one reason or another. So that led me to do a lot of speaking over the years, a lot of training. So I mostly communicate about ways to make communication more inclusive to people with disabilities or people that are otherwise left out of conversations. That's typically what I do.
And that's fantastic. And you and I were interested in having this conversation because I'm passionate about making, whether it's online learning or in person, but we're definitely focusing more on the virtual space, being engaging for everyone and inclusive in that sense too, that, people will refer to it different learning styles, multiple intelligences, but making sure that that space is not boring, it's engaging and accessible. When I say accessible, I know I'm not touching on everything. And there's so much more that I have to learn about that as well. So I think it'll be a really interesting conversation that we bring our two pieces, different questions we might have for each other, and just explore and unpack this topic.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too, with this, with learning space. So I know that websites are an important piece to a lot of people. This is just one portion of the conversation, and there'll be different pieces that we can talk about. But websites or anything that we have online in a digital space is communication, is learning, even when it's not the workshop space. And I definitely want to talk about that as well. You and I have touched on it briefly in previous conversations. People are purchasing a button they can press. Do you want to tell me a little bit more about your thoughts on all of that? Because I think it's super important that people understand a little bit more and do something about this.
Right. So many different things to say. I guess I'm going to start by talking demographics a little bit. When I typically speak about, aiding or helping people with disabilities online, some of the pushback that I get is from people saying, yeah, but is it really that many people? Like, do we really need to care all that much? I mean, I'm focused on my average clients, average users, for instance, and I can't possibly believe that they would fit into that picture. And what people don't realize is that if you take the data from Canada or the United States, for instance, in Canada, people with disabilities, they count for about 22% of the population. In the United States, it's 26%. So it's anywhere between 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 4 people have one or more disabilities in this country, in Canada, for instance.
Right.
So it's a lot of people to begin with. And then, on top of people who have those disabilities, you have their loved ones. You have people that are close to them, that care about them, and could easily be swayed into going into a different direction, a different website, if they were told that that particular one was a very poor experience for, their brother, their mother, their close relatives, or whoever the person be. So So when we think about it from that perspective, and if we were very conservative about what we're saying, and if we said, for instance, that every person with a disability in Canada has one person who cares about them, that 22 becomes 44% of the population, right? Like that,
Right.
Like that. So very quickly that adds up, and the data from the Canadian government, Statistics Canada in this particular case, talks about that 20% across the board, 22% across the board, sorry. But it's also 20% of the working age population. And they define the working age population, I think, if I can remember correctly, something like 25 to 64, something like along those lines. So a little later than what you normally expect. Normally it's like 16 to 64, but their target, their bracket is more like 25 to 64, and that's 20% of the population. When you look at people that are over the age of 65, there are two statistics that I think that are really interesting. The first one is that the elderly themselves, like the population that is 65 and older, is around 17% of the population, and you probably know as well as I do, because we were much younger at some point in our lives, that as we get older, right? I mean, our sight goes a little bit, our hearing isn't as great. So we see that these senses are declining over the years, deteriorating over the years. So as you get older, you experience a lot of situations that look very much like some disabilities. So there are, commonalities within the two. And when you think about people that have disabilities that are over the age of 65, that is 38% of them. So if you're a business, couple of things in there. If you're a business and you're interested in selling to the vast majority of the population, you cannot afford to not think about accessibility, because it's easily 20-some%. And if we again agree that each one could be swayed one way or another, if they had bad reviews from someone that they care about, that's easily twice as much. You add to that people that are getting older, so you had another 15% to that 20% that I was talking about for the working age adults. You're again at 40-some%. And again, if those folks had a problem with your website and they told their friends about it, they might want to go to a competitor instead. So now we're doubling that again. So before you know it, most people benefit from this, either directly or indirectly. So there's a lot to be said. I'm going to stop there because that could be the entire conversation, but there's a lot to be said about the fact that people don't realize how prevalent that is, for one thing. And then on top of that, of course, and I'm not going to get into it today, but add on top of that anyone who is not part of the statistics. Like, for instance, I'm colorblind.
Right.
So when you look at, I struggle with a bunch of things every day because I miss cues when they're based on color, for instance, like reds and greens and stuff like that. To me, it's a pretty abstract concept, actually. Right. And so I miss information. And the population that has color blindness is roughly 10% of males. And when you look at the data for vision impairments, it's only 5% of the population. So they're clearly not including color blindness as part of their statistics. So we know that it's actually bigger than what they're saying. Right. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, definitely we need to be reaching and engaging a lot of people and not excluding people. Right. My grandfather was colorblind too. So you raising that, and I'm looking at my website beside me on my second monitor, and I have a green button and a red button right beside each other. My website person just, helped me update some things, which was great. And as soon as you said colorblind, I thought, oh no, both those buttons are going to merge into each other, because I'm familiar with what my grandfather experienced in that sense too. So it's little things, and I think people don't realize or don't know, right?
It's a bunch of small little details that make the difference, and it's rarely like one barrier that kills the experience for someone. It's sometimes it happens, and some of them are actually more prevalent than others again. But oftentimes it's the accumulation of small little annoyances that make it, at some point, that make it just too much, and then you just give up for one reason or another. Like I don't remember these particular buttons on your site there, but if you have two buttons right one next to one another or close to one another, I'm probably not going to be able to tell which is which. And if you're using a very common metaphor, for instance, to tell me like the red one is like maybe it's fail or decline, and the green one is approve
Right.
or proceed, for instance, and you only have the color to tell me that, I don't know which is which. So
Yeah.
you have to have something on top of that. Like for instance, you might have if you have a red button and a green button, and let's say your green button has a white check mark and the red button has a white X. I don't really care about the background color because the X and the check mark actually tell me what I need to know. But
Right.
you're adding something to the color to make it meaningful for someone who can't perceive the colors.
Right.
That's one of the many tips that you can come up with to work around, in this particular case, color deficiency perception
Right.
that people might experience.
Right. So I've just used Annotate in Zoom too, and I was picking not red or green or, one of those colors. I've just picked black to circle the two buttons here. And I don't know if you can see it with the share.
Yeah, I'm seeing it now. I'm seeing it now. Yep.
So, and I don't know if these two are the same color for you or if they're distinguishable.
They're not. They're as distinguishable as the services and news buttons that we have next to them.
Okay, good.
But I wouldn't be confident to tell you which one is green and which one is red.
Right.
I think that Take the Quiz is the green one.
Yes.
But
yes,
I'm not entirely sure. And the interesting thing in there also, because it's not a case of it's just a color being picked in that particular case. It doesn't have any actual meaning.
Yeah,
but
no, it doesn't, but it can in some situations.
It often does.
Yeah.
And the bigger challenge when these colors are used next to one another, like they are in your case, is that at the limit between the two colors there, that part to me becomes very flashy and hard on the eye. So if I had a lot of content that was red and green with those colors together, like Christmas for a lot of things is really awful for me for that reason, because people use a lot of green and red together, and it creates this weird effect that is really, it creates a lot of strain on the eyes and makes it very tiring. So I don't know if that's the case for other people, normal people, if you will, but for someone like me, it makes it very uncomfortable. So I would avoid those websites if I could when they're used.
If there's a lot of that color everywhere, and that's the only place that I have that the red color. But I think we have to keep having these conversations and understand everyone's different experience. I focus a lot on the learning experience journey before, during, and after an online workshop or anything like that. And part of that before piece is potentially sending people resources, making sure, hopefully, that PDFs are accessible. That's something I need to learn even more about. I know on my website and with social media, we have been making sure that we describe the visuals and have a visual description, not just in text, but part of that visual itself. But and then I know a little bit that PDFs then should be able to be used, so text to audio, if that's one of the needs and things. And I think there's just so much that people need to learn, and that sometimes can feel overwhelming, just like it was for a lot of people who bring their workshops online. It's learning a new language. It's understanding, a complex, but I think we start one step at a time. But the overwhelm or being, I think sometimes people don't bother. There's laws where people have to do a certain amount, but I really want to, I hope people try and do more and do better and care to keep learning and keep improving how accessible all resources are as well. So I don't know if you have some thoughts on some of that.
Well, completely agree with what you said. I mean, there's a million little details that you could be doing, and no one can possibly get everything perfect. There's so many things that you could be doing, but always be on the lookout for that other little thing you could do to make it a little better. Puts you on a path where it becomes more usable to people who have different experiences than the one that you have. And my best advice, I think, when it comes to something like this is just to realize that your audience is not an extension of yourself. I mean, what you like, what you prefer, your own biases, your expectations, that's great. I mean, that works for you, but other people will have a different set of experiences or biases or needs. And if you are not really accounting for what those could be, by asking your audience what it is that works for them, you're going to create an experience that is going to be very limited to your own little world and your own little perspective as to what people actually expect. And you're going to create something that will be exclusionary as a result of that. It's a very straightforward equation. So always being on the lookout for getting feedback, like gathering feedback from other people, especially people who have those disabilities. Like if you know someone, for instance, who's dyslexic, who has dyslexia, and you ask them to give you feedback about your website, they might come up and tell you, well, it's pretty good. I like the content. I like the fact that there's a lot of iconography, so I don't have to read a lot of content. I don't really like that particular page because you have these big walls of text that are harder to read. Your font is a little harder for me to read because it's like the letters are a little thin. So I mix up the P's and the Q's, for instance, that sort of thing. So you could learn from that and make a couple of changes that would still make your website, it could be as nice and aesthetically pleasing as it is right now, but it would be a little enhanced from the perspective of someone with dyslexia.
That's right.
A month later, you meet someone who has ADHD and you ask them, like, from your perspective as someone who has attention deficit disorder, what it is that maybe triggers you when you're using a website. And they might tell you something about, two colors being side by side, like I was talking earlier. And maybe for that person, it is an issue because it makes it harder for them to focus on a particular thing. You learn from that, you make another tweak, and before you know it, tweak after tweak, it gets a little better.
Getting better. And it's about those conversations there, caring enough to ask. And I agree with you too, what you were saying, that people just know what they like. When I'm working with my clients too about their learning experience design, I often will mention that as facilitators, we tend to facilitate in the style and way we like to receive information. And it's about layering in different elements so that we are engaging the person that, for example, lights up and really engages with the content if they're talking to people, or someone that is, clicking buttons because they're more action oriented and bringing those elements online. But I'm also very aware that those elements might also not work for everybody. They are drawing in some people from the learning perspective. But so I often recommend to have alternatives, whether it's the technology limitation or, and of course, educate at the beginning to show people how to use the tools online. But for example, if we're asking people to annotate in Zoom, I also want to give the options, whether they don't have access, annotation's not working for them, or it's a dexterity, someone could have arthritis or something where clicking or typing fast is hard. And so whether there's also the invitation to come on mic or type in chat, that it's also giving alternatives, and that it's not awkward that one person is saying, well, I can't do that. That right away up front, please, inviting people to do the activity one way, but also giving alternatives right away. I don't know what your thoughts are on that too.
Well, I like your example about the annotation toolbar in Zoom, because that's one that I deal with regularly. The very nature of my work means that I work with people that are blind very regularly. One of my colleagues as an instructor is a blind person. He's been blind pretty much since birth. So he doesn't have a use for a mouse. He doesn't have a monitor. Like, there's no point in having those things. So he relies on a keyboard, and he knows his keyboard really well, and he navigates through that. So the annotation toolbar is a very visual tool.
It is.
So for someone like him, being able to go to a menu, select a particular tool in that menu, like the stamps or the type tool or anything like that, he can't even tell where they are. And in that particular case, in the particular implementation of the Zoom features, it's not particularly accessible to the screen reader that he uses to turn the text into audio. So he can't use a tool like that. So when we do training, we work in different ways. Like for some people, we're going to turn, our screen into a whiteboard and then use the annotation toolbar for those who like to do that. But we'll also offer, chat as a fallback. So if you don't want to, if you can't, if for whatever reason you don't, because there are people who can't use the annotation toolbar, and then there are those who are going to connect to your workshop, for instance, not through the Zoom desktop application, but through Chrome, for instance. And when you do from the browser, that tool is not available to you. It's not part of the features that are available. So as a presenter, as a speaker, as a instructor, trainer, whatever, being aware of those things and always offering different alternatives to be able to participate is pretty important, because you don't have to have a person with a disability to feel excluded. You might just be training a bunch of people who actually did not have the ability to download Zoom data for in their environment, and they're all connecting through Chrome, and then none of them have the tool. But if you plan for that as your only way to deliver your content, you have a problem. So having these different options, I mean, having options is always better. That's pretty self-evident. But if you approach it from the perspective of wanting to create different opportunities for people who have different types of experiences, you are automatically creating something that will be more inclusive of everyone, because other people might just not feel like playing with that tool right now because they're busy, their mind is busy with other things.
That's right.
Maybe they're afraid of technology a little bit, so they don't want to make a mistake in front of their colleagues, so they'd rather not use it, but they know how to type in chat, so that they'd rather do that. And just being cognizant of this and respecting what people's limits or boundaries might be when it comes to that creates a more inclusive experience for them also. It feels better to not to have to try and struggle through something you're not comfortable with, especially when you're in a situation where it might make you look, less than others for one reason or another.
Yes.
And I see you just turned on the transcripts there. That's another great example of what we could talk about. These transcripts there, they're great. I mean, by all means, if you're presenting in front of a group using a virtual platform, whether it's Zoom, Teams, or Meet, or anything like that, by all means use those. But at the same time, be very much aware that this is, artificial intelligence powered, so AI powered. So it has limits, and it's not perfect. It's not particularly accurate. It's not turned on. I'm actually going to turn it on right now, because it probably picks up part of what I say, but not everything.
It's pretty good. It's pretty good, but yes, it's not perfect. It depends on accents, and it does have different languages very well. I mean, Zoom does have the translation option. That's a whole other thing. But I definitely would encourage, as a mandatory type thing, that everybody goes into their Zoom or other platforms. Almost every platform has some sort of option for closed captioning, and make sure those settings are turned on. So then when someone asks for it, or automatically turn it on. And it doesn't always have to be the whole transcript. I know for some keynote speakers, professional speakers, to have a whole transcript be able to be saved, I think from accessibility, if that's a request, you need to do that. I know for some people, for intellectual property, they might not want the full transcript to be able to be saved from their keynote. I don't know if that matters to people or not, but the closed captioning should be a minimum, that's activated. And when someone asks for it and needs it, that you already have it ready and available. I don't know what your
Well, to add to what you said, again, that full transcript is obviously useful if you have a hearing impairment. If you're hard of hearing, it helps you. If you're deaf, it definitely helps you, because lip reading will only get you so far. But as someone who is a non-native speaker like myself, sometimes just being able to read what is being said is actually very helpful. I mean, even if I pay attention to what you're saying, I might miss a word or two, and then if I can go back and read it quickly, then I'm okay. But on top of that, let's say that I'm attending one of your sessions, but I'm working from home, and my kid is not at school today because the schools are closed again because of COVID. So the kid is right there, and she wants something. I'm distracted. I can always take care of my kid and then go back to the full transcript and then catch up on what you said really quickly, so I don't miss everything. It's not a question of having a disability. It's just a question of providing an accommodation that helps people keep up in that particular case.
And if the transcript wasn't activated and you weren't there, you couldn't scroll back. The closed captioning wouldn't do that. So I think it's helping people understand different situations, like having children at home, or sometimes someone is joining a meeting just on the phone, so they're not seeing the PowerPoint picture. So describing the picture, and just automatically, sometimes when I'm recording my YouTube videos, I'm trying to keep in mind that it's also going to be a podcast. And that I need to then describe something that I might be showing, and just layering again, so that different people in different contexts, or someone could be watching a YouTube video on the bus and forgot their earbuds. I do that all the time, where I've forgotten to put my headphones in my purse. But I'm bored, I'm sitting in a waiting room, I want to watch something. So I turn on the closed captioning so I can catch. It's hard, but I'm still able
at least
to
there's something,
right?
Yeah. And again, you make a really good point. I mean, you said something that is exactly what my own advice would be when it comes to describing visuals. Let's say I'm presenting information from the stage, and I'm showing a pie chart, for instance.
Right.
I mean, you could. What most people will do is say something along the lines of, "As you can see here," and then they start blah blah blah, whatever. I make it a point to always present information as if I was actually on a podcast. So if I verbally describe what's on the screen, well, for one thing, I'm emphasizing on the important data points that are on that particular screen. I'm not just relying on people to see it. So anyone who has a visual impairment, it doesn't have to be someone who's blind, and although these people do exist and they do attend conferences, I can tell you that much. Exactly. But I mean, beyond people that are actually blind, just anyone who has low vision or needs glasses and maybe forgotten them that day, or anyone who's sitting a little too far in that room and they can't quite see, or having, as you said, being on a mobile device and then everything being so small, you can't see the information as well. So if you make it a point to really describe the important data points as part of your conversation, if it just naturally flows into your conversation, I don't actually need to see it because you told me. And if that is picked up with the transcript, for instance, it's a pretty inclusive experience. The only thing I would add to that is that going back to what I said at the beginning about the whole thing being AI powered. See, that's actually not bad. It actually picked up on AI. That I'm surprised.
It's not too bad.
It's not too bad, but I guess my English has gotten better over the years. But it used to be pretty bad, and that's my point. The point being that it's all dynamically generated through technology, so it has limits. And right now, the best captions like that are probably around 90-95% accurate, which means that for every 10 words or so, there's going to be about one that is not exactly what you said, or might be radically different than what you said. And we work around that because we get the content or the context and everything, because we also hear it and we sort of forgive. Our brain just forgives it naturally. But if you're someone who has a hearing impairment, and every 10 words or so, you have to step back and say, did he really say that? Or like, what is that? Like, that comes back really, really quick. So 1 word out of 10 is 90% accurate, right? So until we're like at 95, maybe 98%, that alone is probably not all that great, which really means that if you are, well, maybe if you're, if you're a speaker and you're setting up your own Zoom and you're doing that thing, maybe you won't go down that path. But if you are an event organizer, for instance, planning to have an actual captionist being there, and then like a human actually transcribing as people talk, will give you that 100% accuracy that will really make it an inclusive experience. If you ask someone who's deaf what they think about live transcripts, most of them will tell you that it actually sucks because of what I just said. They want something that works better for them, and rightfully so. And when you think about the cost of having a professional captionist working for you, it's probably like $50-$60 an hour. So all things considered, if you're putting an event together, that's just another item on your budget.
Absolutely. Yep. To consider all of these different things. And then online, we can accidentally be talking over top of each other too, with the slight delays and how that picks that up. And
Yeah, and some of that is missed when that happens.
Yeah.
Or see, in the case of what we're doing right now, I mean, your sentences and mine are just intertwined, and you can't really tell the difference.
Right.
So if someone hears us talking, like they understand and they can differentiate our voices. But if you rely on that particular thing, the sentence might be very confusing sometimes. So it's great, but it's not perfect.
Right.
And like going a little further, again, will provide a better experience from that standpoint.
And a transcript will do a little bit better. So right now I don't have transcript, like the full transcript. I have closed captioning. And this is making me rethink too, to activate that for all the reasons that you've mentioned. It will do a better job. The saved transcript won't save the pictures, like people have, you know, but it will pick up bad words. We've tested that out too. So for people to be aware of that. But another thing too, like this recording right now is not picking up the closed captioning that we've activated. That's a live experience, unless I was doing a screen recording. But when I upload to YouTube, you know, people can activate the automatic. It's not perfect either. I, you know, could take, and I probably will take the extra time to go through otter.ai, I think is what
Otter.ai.
Yeah, for transcription service to go through it and actually fix the imperfections and make sure, because of what we're talking about and taking that time.
Well, yeah,
you know, it's to do that. But I wanted to mention one more thing too, while we were talking about this. I often recommend too, when people are recording their Zoom workshop and they've just ran a poll. Now, first of all, polls might not be super accessible. What I often do recommend too, that people first of all read it out loud, so someone can't see it. Also read out loud the results, because the recording is not picking up what everybody's seeing live, so that recording, then people are part of that conversation. But do you have some thoughts about that too, with polls not being super accessible? Also, again, giving that alternate, then someone's kind of outing themselves if they are putting their response in chat, which is an option. Sometimes people don't have polls, like can't see it, don't access it. They've come in, you know, as we've said, from a different method. I will give that alternate, type your answer in chat, or if you picked other, what does that mean? Do you have some additional thoughts about some of those tools too?
Sure, I do. Well, first of all, I do it exactly like you do. Like when I use the polls feature in Zoom, for instance, you know, we'll create the polls ahead of time, and then we prompt that window, and then people just vote. And like I do make it a point to visually describe what's going on.
Right.
I kind of turn it into like a horse race. Like we have these 4 or 5 different questions. Okay, so A is ahead right now. B is right there, and you can sort of play with that. It's a little fun. It creates a bit of an excitement, I guess. But at the same time, it also lets people know, if they can't see your screen, it lets them know like what it looks like. And then at the very end, I'm going to go through it really quickly, saying, okay, so here's what that comes up to. Like 25% of people voted for B, and then 55% voted for A, and then whatever for C. And so B is clearly the winner, or whatever the number was. I didn't really pick up on what I said, but I mean, one of the answers is the most popular answer. Now, the actual answer was this, and we can work with that. But at the same time, offering people the ability to do that through chat means that if someone doesn't feel like working with the poll, or if they don't really know how that works, or if it doesn't really work for them from an accessibility standpoint, you know, they have that other option. Chat is actually very accessible for most people. It works really well if you depend on your keyboard to navigate. It works really well if you depend on the screen reader software. It works really well if you're depending on voice commands to be able to control your computer and then zoom in on that particular piece and dictate something to your computer. Like, it works well for those features. Poll is actually pretty good also if you depend on your keyboard. If you're proficient enough with your keyboard, you'll get there, but it's a little more complicated. So offering these options are definitely good. But again, it's the idea of, you know, verbally describing what's going on so that nobody is left out of that particular piece of it. That's a huge advice. I mean, in a different environment, or in a different time when we used to present in person more, it's coming back, but
Yeah.
say 2 years ago and before, to me, this idea of visually presenting information, that verbally presenting information, I mean, is just as important as not declining the mic when someone hands it over to you. I mean, how many times have you seen that? I'm blown away when I attend an event of how many people actually decline the mic saying, oh, no, I'm loud enough, people will hear me. No, some people will hear you. Some people won't hear you. Some people might be a little distracted. Some people might need the AV system to be able to relay the information in a cochlear implant. Like there's a bunch of different reasons why they might miss what you're saying. So, stuff like that to me is like very basic considerations when you actually recognize that not everybody thinks or acts or appreciates things the way that you do. Going back to what you said about that before. So, but yeah, I mean, all of those things are rather simple ways to make things more accessible for people. I mean, we're not even talking about some of the more complex things that you talked about, like describing images in text, that sort of thing. That's a little bit more advanced, we could say, I guess. But in terms of just delivery mechanisms that you'd be using to share your content, making it a point of not just pointing to something or referring to something, but actually talking about it and offering people options into different tools that you use in case one of them doesn't really work all that much, is pretty pretty basic, but at the same time, so important for people to feel like they're welcome and that they belong in that experience.
That's right. No one likes to feel left out. It's very disrespectful. And then people aren't getting, the advantages of learning the content and going away and being able to apply what they've learned. And that's the whole point. If that's what we're trying to do, we need to do everything that we can and layer in and keep improving how accessible we are, whether it's our communications or our learning experiences as well too.
And when you think about it also, I mean, I don't know about you, but when I go in to present one way or another, I have a goal in mind. I want to get new clients. I want to sell something. Like I don't just do that because I am passionate, but I mean, that's not the only reason why I wake up in the morning. I need to pay my mortgage to feed my kids. I mean, money is involved one way or another. And it doesn't really compute in my head that you would go out there and then not pay attention to considerations that could exclude easily 20% of your audience. I mean, if I'm going to go out there and spend all that time preparing that content for folks, I want to reach as close to 100% as possible. I don't want to just start at 80 and say, I'll take whatever works within that 80%, the other 20% I can afford not to tap into. And of course, you'd like to do that. So it doesn't really make sense from a business standpoint either to not pay attention to those things. I mean, from a purely financial standpoint, the data from the Ontario Chamber of Commerce was sharing that the after-tax disposable income of people with disabilities in Ontario was $55 billion. That's 55 billion, like with a B there. That's a lot of money. And if you look at the entirety of that capital, including what we call the disability market, so that's people with disability, but also those who care about them, as we were talking at the beginning there, it's around $165 billion a year. So I mean, it's a huge untapped market for anyone who communicates, and I think it's worth people's energy to learn about this a little bit so that they don't alienate as many people as they otherwise might be doing without even knowing about it. And that happens all the time. And those folks are all like, most of those folks are just going to do what everybody else does. At the end, they'll applaud, they'll move out of the room, and they'll never think about you again because you were not speaking to them at all.
Exactly. Yeah, we want
some of them will be vocal about it, but most people are just going to go on their merry way. And when they hear about you, they'll say, oh yeah, I'm not going to go there. That person really doesn't get anything about disabilities, and I'm not going to pick up on what they're saying. So it's just unfortunate because you spend all this energy putting your content together, and we have great messages to share. I think it's worth putting a little bit of time into this so that you push that message as far as you possibly can.
So if we were giving people a place to start, if there are even 3 things that people could start with to make sure that they do and at least you pick one of them to do right away. Do you have 3 top areas or focuses that you can think of?
I've got plenty of top threes.
Okay.
Depends on the content or the topic. Are you thinking like virtually? Are you thinking in person? Are you thinking training versus keynoting? Are you talking websites?
Yeah, great question, because there's so many of those areas. Okay, let's focus in on online virtual facilitation, online training. What are 3 things that people should be doing right away to start with?
So I think the most important things we pretty much covered already. So I'll give you another shot for another top 3 if you want. I mean, in the context of using Zoom or Teams, for instance, I would say by all means turn on live transcript. By all means offer alternatives if you're going to be using a particular feature like annotation or anything like that, whiteboarding or anything like that. Plan for a different option. If you're going to be using breakout rooms, for instance, make sure that people can actually get there, or offer them the ability to bring them to those rooms yourselves if they can't activate the buttons themselves. So be helpful in that sense. And then the last one will be, relevant whether it's virtual or not. And that's just going to be like describe those visuals that you're talking about so that we can see them. I mean, it's actually easier in a virtual environment to be able to read your slides because like I'm right there, like I'm 12 to 18 inches away from my computer, or closer if I need to be closer. So I have a front row seat to your presentation. So it's a little different than being in a room, right? If I'm sitting in the back of the room, then your slide might be very difficult for me to read. But when I'm looking at it this way, it's easier. But I might not be able to pick up on the small details because maybe my vision is blurry. Maybe I have cataracts. Maybe I have low vision. Maybe I need magnification, whatever that is. And being able to describe those things, again, like we said, will make a big difference. I could give you 3 for the websites. Most people have 1, I guess. So, what blows people's minds most of the time in training is when I ask them to try using their websites without their mouse. So that alone might be a weird concept for most people. So I'm just going to explain what that means. We don't think about it, right? I mean, we just use the mouse and we point and click on things, or you use your trackpad on your laptop and you just point and click on stuff. So that's great, but that's a hand-eye coordination thing. If you can't see what's going on, pointing and clicking is pointless, pun intended. So you're going to rely on something else. That something else most of the time is going to be the keyboard itself. So using the tab key, using the space bar, the return key, the arrow keys, you are theoretically supposed to be able to do everything on your website just using these combinations there. If you can't get to something, or if you're tabbing through your different call to actions on your website and you're skipping over something that you could click on, that's an accessibility problem. I mean, some of the content on your website does not work outside of the mouse metaphor. So that's a huge one. That's a really, really big one to look into. And it's actually a very easy one to find. If you're trying to use your own site with just your keyboard, you will notice right away what doesn't work. Maybe you'll notice that you can't get to your menu at all, which is a pretty big concern when you think about it. So working outside of the mouse is a pretty big one. Color contrast is a very big one also. So paying attention to the color, your use of color combinations, how strong the contrasts are, that's definitely a big one. And then I would tell you, I mean, if you're either a technical person or if you work with someone who handles your website, making sure that your images are described in text. So back to something that you said. So the alt text values of the images in the source code, making sure that you have a description for each of the images, so that people who can't see the screen but will have the screen read to them will have a description of the image as opposed to the image itself, because an image is worth 1,000 words if you bother to actually provide them. Otherwise, it's just a blank canvas otherwise. And I guess I can give you a 4th one that also works with the first set for like an online presentation or live person present. Well, I mean,
that too.
In-person presentation. And that's just captioning your videos. That's a huge one as well. You mentioned that as part of your preparation for this recording here. But either going through a vendor like rev.com, for instance, who will charge you like $1 or $2 per minute of video content to caption it, or learn to do it yourself. It's actually very easy to do. I mean, if you can watch a movie and B, just doing this while you're watching the movie, it's one movie or two, and then you're done. So a couple of hours, and then you potentially make a big difference in your audience's experience, and you definitely make a statement as to your commitment to inclusion. And both are very valuable.
Yeah,
so
very important. And
things like that.
I'm glad you also mentioned about the breakout rooms. Most of the time I have mine go automatic, so people aren't having to click any buttons unless we're doing a specific engagement activity where people are picking which room they want to go to. But then I also am sending people to the rooms that need that assistance.
Right.
Well,
and it's pretty easy overall to just tell people, okay, so you're going to be able to choose whatever room you want to go into. If you have a difficulty actually doing that, just private message me. Nobody else will know, and then you see that in chat, and then you help them out. That's it. Pretty easy.
Is it easy for someone to type in the chat and also pick who they're typing it to? Is that an accessible thing to do?
It is accessible from the standpoint of the international guidelines that dictate how to build this stuff from a technical standpoint. So it works. It's not more difficult. I would argue it's not more difficult for someone to do it when they're blind than someone who's sighted but doesn't really know how that works to begin with. There's a learning curve to learn how to use it, of course. But if you describe that at the beginning, so we're going to be using chat for this presentation. So let's just do a quick overview of how that works for those of you who are not familiar. You have that little drop down, then you can see if you want to chat directly to a person or to us. In some cases, it's actually limited, so it's even easier. But just mentioning that it's there, and then you pick who you want to send it to, and then you type your message, you press enter, and then you're done. And it actually works very well with someone depending on a keyboard. It works really well for someone depending on a screen reader. So there aren't obvious accessibility barriers with using it, except actually using it.
Knowing how to use that. And I always recommend that too, to have navigation slides, but again, not just visually, actually take people through in an auditory way and help people, ask people, okay, type in chat, hello, and that sort of thing, so that and it's describing on the lower left of the screen, all of those pieces, trying to be as inclusive as possible. Are the green check marks and things like that, often those probably wouldn't be accessible if we're asking people for the reactions at the bottom.
Not that great. But again, they're very visual. So anything that relies on a visual experience, you want to have you want to think of some kind of a fallback for that. It's great.
Alternate options.
And I'll also balance it out on your end. It might be nice to use those little emojis or reactions, but if you make it a systematic thing, it gets old pretty quickly, right?
Right. Exactly.
So it might be something as simple as, okay, so if you think this is great, give us a thumbs up in the reactions, or maybe put a plus in chat.
Exactly.
Super simple.
The alternate option is so important. This has been a great conversation. We could definitely talk for hours about this as well. And I'll probably have two versions, a short version because people's attention spans aren't super long, but y'all have a blog post in LinkedIn. I'll share all of that with you as well, Denis, before that goes out, and I'll have the full version accessible too for people to be, that are interested, and a podcast too. Like I usually try to cover all the bases again for accessibility reasons as well. But I really appreciate your time, all your knowledge and insight, and for sharing that with all of us. Denis, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. That was great. Happy I could make it.
Yeah, I'm so glad we finally got to talk, and to thank you to everybody who is either listening to this, watching it, or reading it, that you are checking this out, that you care about the topic, and thank you for picking even one thing that you're going to do following learning about this. I appreciate that. To all of you, that's your call to action in a formal way. And I encourage everyone to try to make your experiences engaging, to turn an audience into participants, and make sure you're not leaving anyone out. Thank you so much.